When I opened my front door that night, I almost felt like an intruder. Something was off, like the place didn't belong to me anymore. I was home early from a work trip, hoping to surprise Emily. But as I stepped inside, the quietness felt heavy, unnatural. Not a sound from upstairs, no faint music playing from the kitchen, no hum of Sophie's cartoons echoing from the living room. Just silence. I put my bag down, calling out, "Emily? Soph?" Nothing. But as I moved down the hallway, I noticed her shoes by the door, her favorite heels, the ones she only wore on special nights out. Emily was definitely home. I found her in the dining room, standing at the table. The usual clutter of bills and Sophie's school papers were gone, replaced by an unfamiliar bouquet of flowers, roses, red and vivid against the white tablecloth, like something out of someone else's romance novel. Emily didn't even look up when I walked in. She just stood there, holding a glass of wine in one hand, her other hand resting lightly on the edge of the table as if bracing herself. Her expression was strange. Not surprised or happy to see me, more like someone caught in a lie that hadn't quite unraveled. "Oh," she said, her eyes widening slightly as she registered my presence. "You're back." Something in the way she said it, so flat and distant, made me freeze. I glanced down at the table and noticed a dinner setting for two, but everything looked too staged, too perfect. Silverware polished, candles set out, the wine barely touched. And only one glass. Hers. I tried to keep my tone casual, even as my pulse quickened. "What's all this?" I asked, gesturing to the setup. "Oh, nothing," she said, brushing it off with a light shrug. "I thought I'd make myself a nice dinner. Sophie's with your mom tonight, so..." She trailed off, her voice uncertain, like even she didn't buy her own excuse. Her hand clutched the stem of her wineglass a little too tight, her knuckles pale against the dim glow from the candle. The silence between us stretched, almost daring me to break it. "Right," I said slowly, eyeing the wineglass she hadn't yet touched. My mind raced, but I didn't press her. I just nodded, forcing a smile, and moved to grab a glass from the cabinet. "Pour me one?" She hesitated, but nodded, reaching for the bottle. Her hands were shaking slightly as she poured, spilling a bit on the tablecloth. The tension between us was thick, a tangible thing, but I stayed quiet, letting her fill my glass. And then I noticed it, a faint scent clinging to the air, something unfamiliar and sharp. Not her usual perfume. I knew that scent like the back of my hand, but this was different, almost masculine. My pulse quickened as I took a slow, steady breath. I wasn't home early. I was in someone else's place, someone else's scene. And my wife, standing right in front of me, looked like the stranger I'd just interrupted. It wasn't just the setup on the table that struck me, it was the way she was acting, like she was hiding behind a script. She avoided looking at me, kept her voice too calm, too neutral. But it was the scent in the air that stuck with me. Some cologne I didn't recognize, still lingering. It wasn't an obvious thing, not overpowering, but there. Just enough to tell me something was wrong. "Dinner for two?" I asked, keeping my tone as steady as I could. She gave a forced laugh, way too forced, and looked at me for barely a second before glancing away. "No, it's just... I just thought I'd do something nice for myself, you know?" She managed a small smile, looking down at her glass. "Sophie's with your mom, you were out of town." I figured, why not? The more she talked, the more obvious it became. She was hiding something, and she wasn't even doing it well. Her eyes flickered toward the front door every few seconds, like she was expecting someone or bracing herself for an escape. It was enough to make me take a step back, mentally anyway. I needed to approach this carefully. "Right, okay," I said, leaning back against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "And this dinner? What's the occasion? We're not big on candlelit dinners, at least not for one, right?" She hesitated, her hand tightening around her wineglass. "I just wanted something special for once, all right?" I could feel the irritation in her voice, but I pushed forward. I needed to see her reaction, needed to press that button and watch how she reacted. "So, just you, wine, candles, the whole setup?" I kept my voice calm, as casual as I could make it, hoping she'd stumble, hoping she'd give me something. "You're being ridiculous, David," she snapped, and finally looked directly at me. "I just wanted to treat myself to a nice evening." Her tone was sharp, defensive, but her eyes, they were scared. I could see it, even through her attempt to look irritated. She was scared of something, maybe even scared of me asking questions. And that was the moment I knew something had happened. Something she didn't want me to know about. I pushed off the counter, moving toward her, watching her tense up. "I was just asking," I said, keeping my voice as level as I could. "Look, I get it. You're alone, you're treating yourself. That's great. But, come on, Emily, we both know something's up." She stared at me, her eyes widening just slightly before she caught herself. "David, don't do this. Don't make something out of nothing." Her voice was almost pleading now, but there was a warning in it too. A silent challenge, daring me to go further, daring me to push her buttons. And as much as I wanted to drop it, I couldn't. Not with the scent of someone else's cologne hanging in the air. Not with the tension in her voice. Not with the way she was gripping that wine glass like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I took a step back, letting her words hang between us. Fine, if that's how she wanted to play it, I'd wait. I'd wait and watch, and I'd find out the truth one way or another. Because something had shifted, something was wrong, and I was done ignoring the signs. "All right," I said finally, nodding toward the stairs. "I'll take a quick shower. Long day, you know?" I didn't wait for her to respond. I walked upstairs, heading straight to our bedroom, hoping to find something, anything, that would confirm what I was beginning to suspect. I opened her closet, glanced around at her things, looking for any sign, any out-of-place item. Then I spotted it, tucked into the side of her closet, barely noticeable if you weren't looking. An extra phone. It wasn't hers, at least not the one she usually used. But there it was, half hidden among her shoes, almost as if she wanted it out of sight. I picked it up, weighing it in my hand, feeling the anger rise inside me. Taking a breath, I turned it on, my heart pounding as the screen lit up. No passcode. The messages were there, clear as day, messages from someone named Jay. They weren't long, just a series of short, direct exchanges, the kind you send when you don't want someone to know too much. But the most recent one, that one was different. "Tonight was amazing. Already miss you." I stared at the words, reading them again, feeling my mind blank for a second before the anger took over. I didn't even know this Jay. Didn't know who he was, didn't care, really. All I knew was that he'd been here, in my house, with my wife, and she'd hidden it from me. I scrolled through the messages, not bothering to read them fully. It didn't matter what they said, the fact that they were there at all was enough. I took the phone downstairs, holding it up as I walked into the dining room. She looked up, her face pale as she saw what I was holding. "David." "Don't," I cut her off, feeling the anger boiling over. "Don't even start. Who's Jay?" She swallowed, her eyes darting away from me. It's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I echoed, my voice louder than I intended. "Then why are you hiding another phone in your closet? Why are there messages from some guy named Jay, talking about how great tonight was?" Her silence was all the answer I needed. She didn't deny it, didn't try to explain. She just sat there, looking at me, her mouth slightly open as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. I felt the weight of it settle over me, the realization that this wasn't just some innocent mistake, that she'd been lying to me. She'd had someone else in my house, in our life, and she'd tried to hide it. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked away, refusing to answer. And that was when I realized it didn't matter. It didn't matter how long, didn't matter who this guy was or what he meant to her. All that mattered was that she'd chosen him over me, chosen to betray everything we'd built together. I took a step back, still clutching the phone. I didn't know what I was going to do, didn't know if I was going to smash it against the wall or throw it at her, but I needed something. I needed some way to make this anger go away. "David, please," she finally spoke, her voice barely audible. I can explain. Explain? I repeated, letting out a bitter laugh. You think you can explain this? She nodded, looking up at me with a mixture of desperation and guilt. I didn't mean for it to happen, all right? It just did. I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. You didn't mean for it to happen? That's your excuse? She stood up, crossing her arms over her chest, as if bracing herself. Look, I'm not going to make excuses, all right? I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But please, David, let me explain. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down, forcing myself to listen. Fine, I said, my voice cold. Go ahead. Explain. She swallowed, looking down at the floor. I don't know how it started, okay? Things have been hard. Between us, I mean. You're always working, always busy, and I just needed someone. I felt my fists clench, the anger bubbling up again. So, that's your excuse? You needed someone, so you went and found this Jay? She didn't answer, just stood there, looking at me with those same guilty eyes. And for the first time, I realized I didn't even recognize her. This wasn't the woman I'd married, wasn't the person I'd spent years building a life with. This was a stranger, someone who'd chosen to betray me, chosen to lie and hide and destroy everything we'd built. I took a step back, feeling the weight of it all crashing down on me. I didn't know what I was going to do next, didn't know if I could even look at her anymore. All I knew was that everything I thought I knew was gone, shattered by a few lines of text on a phone she'd hidden from me. David, she began, but I cut her off, raising a hand to silence her. Just don't, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I don't want to hear it anymore. And with that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there in silence. I walked out of the room, but my mind was screaming. I made it to the den and sat there, head in my hands, trying to wrap my mind around what she'd just told me. It didn't fit, didn't match the life I thought we had. I wanted to march back in there, demand answers, but I knew I'd only get more deflections. If she was willing to lie to my face about this, what else was she hiding? I couldn't sit still. I got up, pacing, each step building up the fury inside me. I could still smell that cologne lingering in the air, reminding me of the stranger who'd been in my home, on my wife. Just the thought of it drove me insane. After a few minutes, I marched back into the dining room, where she was still standing, her eyes fixed on the table. She looked up when she heard me, a flicker of something like hope crossing her face, like maybe I was ready to hear her side. I didn't give her a chance to speak. How long has this been going on? I demanded, barely keeping my voice steady. Her eyes darted away, focusing somewhere behind me. David, please. It's complicated. Complicated? I nearly laughed. Let me simplify it, then. You either tell me everything, right now, or this ends here. Tonight. She hesitated, taking a slow, deep breath. It's been a few months. 6, maybe 7. 6 or 7 months. She was standing here admitting to months of betrayal like it was nothing. The thought twisted my stomach. And this guy, Jay, he's been here, in our house? She didn't respond, and that was all the answer I needed. I felt the anger spike, my fists clenching involuntarily. You brought him into my home? Into our home? I took a step closer, barely able to contain myself. Where our daughter lives. Where we're supposed to have something real? Her face went pale, and she stepped back, pressing herself against the wall. David, I'm sorry. I swear, I never wanted you to find out like this. I shook my head, disbelief still washing over me in waves. So, what, you were planning on keeping this a secret? Just going on with this affair behind my back? Her silence was answer enough. She hadn't planned on telling me at all. I felt the weight of it settle over me, every lie she'd told, every moment she'd pretended we were fine. It was like watching a stranger, someone I didn't know at all. She finally spoke, her voice shaking. I know you're angry. I know I messed up. But I need you to understand, things between us, they haven't been right for a while. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. So, that's your excuse? Things haven't been right? You didn't even try to talk to me about it, did you? You just went looking for someone else. Her eyes flashed with something anger, maybe, or frustration. I tried, David. But you were always busy, always focused on work. You were never here. Never here? I snapped. You think I was working for myself? I was building a life for us, for our daughter. And you decided to throw that away because you were feeling neglected? She winced at my words, but I didn't care. She deserved to feel every ounce of the anger I was feeling right now. It's not that simple, she said, her voice barely audible. I didn't plan this. It just happened. I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. It just happened? I repeated. That's what you're going with? You just accidentally fell into bed with this guy? Her face flushed with anger. You don't understand. You've never understood. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I wanted to hurt you? I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. Yeah, I'm sure that's what you were thinking about while you were off with him. Her face crumpled, but I had no sympathy left for her. She could cry all she wanted, it wasn't going to erase what she'd done. It wasn't going to fix the fact that she'd betrayed me in the worst possible way. She took a shaky breath, looking at me with pleading eyes. David, please. Let's just talk about this. I know I messed up, but we can work through this. Work through this? I repeated, feeling the anger boil over. You think I'm going to just forgive you? Pretend this didn't happen? She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. No. You had your chance to fix things. If you wanted to work on this marriage, you should have come to me. Instead, you went and found someone else. She took a step toward me, reaching out like she was going to touch me, but I pulled back. The thought of her touching me, the same hands she'd used to touch him, made me sick. David, please. I still love you, she said, her voice breaking. This was a mistake, but it doesn't change how I feel about you. Her words hit me like a slap. She actually thought she could stand here, confess to months of betrayal, and still claim she loved me? I shook my head, barely able to look at her. You don't get to say that, I said, my voice cold. You don't get to claim you love me after what you did. Love isn't lying, it isn't sneaking around behind my back. Whatever you feel, it isn't love. She flinched, her hand dropping to her side. David, please. Just give me a chance to explain. I know I've hurt you, but we can fix this. Fix this? I said, feeling the anger rise again. How do you propose we fix this, Emily? By pretending it never happened? By pretending you didn't betray me in the worst possible way? She looked down, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know how to fix this. But I want to try. I want to make things right. I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. You want to make things right? Then tell me the truth. Tell me how long you've been lying to me, sneaking around with this guy. Her face crumpled, but she forced herself to look at me. I told you. It's been a few months. A few months? I shook my head, disbelief mingling with the anger. And you thought I'd never find out? You thought you could just keep doing this and I'd be none the wiser? I didn't think about it, she whispered, her voice choked with tears. I just wanted something. I needed something. Needed something, I repeated, the bitterness thick in my voice. So, what, our marriage wasn't enough for you? I wasn't enough? She looked away, refusing to answer, and that was all I needed to know. Whatever this was, whatever excuse she had, it wasn't enough. Nothing she could say would ever be enough. I took a step back, feeling the weight of it settle over me, the reality of what she'd done finally sinking in. This wasn't something we could fix, wasn't something we could just move past. She'd broken something that couldn't be put back together, no matter how many apologies she gave me. "David, please," she whispered, reaching out again. "I know I hurt you. But I can't lose you. Not like this." I looked at her, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. This was the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd built a life with. And now she was a stranger, someone I couldn't trust, someone who'd betrayed me in a way I could never forgive. "It's too late, Emily," I said, my voice cold. "You already lost me." Her face crumpled, and she took a step back, tears streaming down her face. But I didn't care. I was done. Done with the lies, done with the betrayal, done with her. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in silence. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see her face, or worse, flashes of what she might have done with him. The thoughts tortured me, replaying every single moment of our marriage, looking for signs I'd missed, things I should have seen. I lay there in the dark, fuming, unable to calm down. I didn't know what my next move was, but I knew I wasn't about to sit back and let her walk away from this unscathed. She had torn everything apart without a second thought for me or for Sophie, and now she was acting like an apology was all it would take to make things right. Not a chance. By morning, I had a plan. It wasn't complex or dramatic, but I didn't need drama. I just needed to make her feel the loss as deeply as I did. She would understand what she'd thrown away, and by the end of it, she'd feel the emptiness of her choices. So I sat down with a notebook and began listing out what I needed to do to hit her where it hurt. First thing was the finances. I knew more than she did about the money we had saved up, and it was no secret that she had relied on me for managing the bills and accounts. If she was ready to betray me, then she'd have to survive without any financial support from me. I took out my laptop and logged into our shared account. All our savings, every cent we'd put away for Sophie's future, for our vacations, for emergencies, I split it all and transferred my half into a new account under my name only. By the time I was done, she'd be left with nothing but her income, which wouldn't be nearly enough to sustain her lifestyle. She'd feel the strain, and she'd know exactly why. Then, I changed the passwords on every account we shared. Bank accounts, credit cards, streaming services, even the Wi-Fi at home. She'd have to come crawling to me just to get back online. I wanted her to feel that loss, that isolation. The same kind I'd felt when I realized she'd been hiding this whole second life from me. The next part of my plan was Sophie. I'd never use my daughter as a pawn, but Emily didn't deserve to play the perfect mother card after this. I made it clear to her that Sophie would be staying with me while we sorted things out. "You can have her on weekends, if you want. But until I decide how we're handling this, Sophie's staying with me." She didn't argue, didn't even try. Just nodded, looking more defeated than I'd ever seen her. That was fine by me, guilt was a good start. I'd make sure she'd feel it all the way. The last piece was her friends and family. Emily had a reputation she valued: a stable mom, a loving wife, successful, and dedicated. But what would people say if they knew the truth? It wasn't like I wanted to air our dirty laundry, but she needed to be held accountable. She wouldn't get to walk around pretending to be a model wife after what she'd done to us. I knew she'd be mortified if everyone found out. So I started small. I called her parents first. They'd always been kind to me, supportive of our marriage. They deserved to know why things were falling apart. When her mom picked up, I didn't hold back. "I wanted to tell you before you hear it from someone else," I said calmly. "Emily's been unfaithful. She's been seeing another man for months. I didn't know until last night." The silence on the other end was long, painful. Her mother started to say something, then stopped, then finally managed a shaky, "I'm so sorry, David." I could hear the heartbreak in her voice. Emily would have to face them and explain herself now. Her sister was next. Emily had a close relationship with her, and I knew this would hit hard. "You have a right to know," I told her, giving her the briefest details. "We'll be working through the custody situation with Sophie, but as of now, she's staying with me." Her sister didn't hold back. "That's disgusting, David," she said, her voice thick with disgust. "I don't know what to say. I don't know what's wrong with her." "Neither do I replied, though the words felt hollow. I had no idea what had gone wrong, only that it had destroyed everything I cared about. Over the next few days, Emily tried to reach out to me, leaving messages asking to meet, to talk things over. She texted me non-stop, apologizing, trying to explain, trying to salvage anything she could. But I didn't respond, didn't give her the satisfaction. I ignored her completely. I spent that time focusing on Sophie, keeping her routine as normal as possible. I'd take her to school, pick her up, help her with homework, and make dinner. I wanted her to feel as secure as possible, even if my own world had fallen apart. She didn't need to know the details, all she needed to know was that Dad was there for her, no matter what. After about a week, I knew it was time to set the final part of my plan into motion. I'd held on to the anger long enough, but I couldn't just let her off the hook. I needed her to feel the loss, to understand that every choice she made had a consequence. One evening, after Sophie was in bed, I decided it was time. I texted Emily. "We need to meet. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. I'll come to the house." When I arrived the next evening, she was waiting for me, looking pale and nervous. She probably thought this was her chance to get me back, to plead her case. She started with her apologies, her excuses, talking about feeling neglected, about needing something she couldn't explain. I let her talk, let her go on about how lonely she'd felt, how it had just happened. I waited, staying calm, even as she tried to manipulate the conversation, shifting the blame to me, to circumstances. Finally, I cut her off. "I'm not here for your excuses, Emily," I said. "You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." Her face fell, but I didn't let up. "I've already taken half of our savings," I told her. "You're on your own now. You're not touching anything of mine anymore." She stared at me, stunned. You can't do that, David." "Oh, I already have," I replied coldly. "And as for Sophie, she's staying with me. You can have her on weekends, maybe a few days during the week if I feel like it. But I'm not letting you pretend to be the perfect mother after what you've done." The shock on her face was almost satisfying. She tried to argue, tried to convince me that she was still a good mother, that Sophie needed her. "I'm not taking her away from you," I told her, "but you're not getting to play happy family either. Not after this." Finally, she broke down, tears streaming down her face. "David, please. I know I made a mistake, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through it. Please, I don't want to lose you." I shook my head, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "No, Emily. You don't get it. You already lost me. This isn't something we fix. This is something you live with. You wanted someone else? Fine. You get to keep them. But you lost me, and you lost our life." She sat down, her face buried in her hands, sobbing. "It might have moved me once, but not now." All I could think about was how much pain she'd put me through, how she'd torn apart everything we'd built without a second thought. I took one last look around the house, at the place that had once felt like a home. But now it was nothing more than a reminder of what she'd destroyed. I picked up my bag and walked to the door, not looking back. "Goodbye, Emily," I said, my voice firm. And then I left, knowing that this was the end. She could live with the mess she'd made. I was done. The days after that final meeting with Emily felt strange, like I was floating through my own life, looking in from the outside. I'd been keeping things steady, at least on the surface. I went to work, came home, picked up Sophie from school, and went through the motions. But inside, I was still boiling. I didn't want to forgive her, I didn't want to give her a way back into my life. She'd lost that right the minute she chose someone else over the family we'd built. But as much as I tried to put her out of my mind, she kept reaching out, texting, calling, even sending letters in some strange attempt to apologize. She begged me to meet again, to let her explain. I'd ignored her for days, refusing to give her any more of my time. But one afternoon, Sophie noticed the tension. Kids have a way of picking up on these things, no matter how hard you try to shield them. She asked why her mom wasn't home, why I wasn't talking to her, and when things would go back to normal. Hearing her say that hit me hard. For Sophie's sake, I had to bring some closure to this mess. I owed it to her, if not to myself, to sit down with Emily one last time and lay everything out, to let her know once and for all that nothing she could say would change what she'd done. So, I agreed to meet Emily. This time, we chose a quiet spot in a nearby park. It was a warm evening, and the air was filled with that early spring freshness. Emily arrived first, looking worn, like she hadn't slept in days. I could tell she'd been crying, though she tried to hide it. But I wasn't here to feel sorry for her, I was here to put an end to whatever hope she thought she still had. She started off hesitantly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Thank you for coming, David. I know you don't owe me anything." "Then let's not waste time," I replied. "You wanted to talk, so talk. But don't expect anything from me." She winced at my tone but nodded. "I know. I deserve that." She took a shaky breath, her hands trembling. "I know I hurt you, David. I know I broke your trust, and I hate myself for it. I've been trying to understand why I did it, why I let things get this far." I just stared at her, waiting for her to get to the point. She looked away, as if gathering her thoughts, then turned back to me. "It was never about you," she said, her voice raw. "You were always there, always supporting me, always doing everything right. But somewhere along the way, I got lost." "Lost?" I repeated, feeling the anger flare up again. "You think that excuses what you did?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I'm not excusing it. I want you to know that it wasn't about not loving you. I loved you, David. I still do. But I felt, I don't know, empty, I guess. Like I'd lost a part of myself, and I was trying to fill it." Her words hit me like a dull weight, but I forced myself to stay calm. "So, instead of talking to me, you found someone else to fill that gap? You think that makes it better?" She looked down, clearly ashamed. "I know it doesn't. I know I should have come to you. But I didn't want to burden you with my problems. You were always so steady, so put together. I thought I was the one who needed to handle it." "You should have," I replied, my voice hard. "Instead, you brought someone else into our lives. Into our home." She flinched, her eyes filling with tears. "I know. And I hate myself for it. Every day, I wish I could take it back. But I can't." There it was, finally. She couldn't take it back. She knew it as well as I did. But I wasn't here to make her feel better or to ease her guilt. I was here to make sure she understood just how much damage she'd done. "You know, Emily," I said, keeping my tone steady, "I never thought you were capable of this. I trusted you completely. I thought you were someone who would stand by me, who would keep our family strong no matter what." "I was that person, David," she whispered, her voice choked. "I don't know what happened to me. I don't know why I let it all fall apart. But I can't lose you. I can't lose Sophie. Please, let me fix this." I shook my head, already knowing what I needed to say. "You can't fix this, Emily. You can't erase what you did. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. I'm not here to make you feel better about it. I'm here to tell you that we're done. Whatever you think you're holding on to, it's gone." Her face crumpled, but I didn't stop. "You threw it all away for something meaningless. And now, you're dealing with the consequences. That's not something I can help you with." She covered her mouth, trying to stifle a sob. "Please, David. I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I can't lose my family. I can't lose you." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay composed. "You already lost us. You lost me the minute you decided someone else was more important than the life we built together." She looked at me, desperation in her eyes. What about Sophie? She needs both of us. Can't we at least try, for her? Sophie will always have both of us, I said firmly. But that doesn't mean we have to stay together. She deserves a stable home, not one filled with lies. She nodded, her shoulders slumping as she accepted what I was saying. I understand, she said quietly, barely able to look at me. I understand if you can't forgive me. I needed to tell you that I still love you. I looked at her, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. You don't get to say that anymore, Emily. Love isn't what you did. Love doesn't betray. Whatever you feel, it's not love. Not the kind I thought we had. She looked down, her face pale and defeated. For the first time, I saw her truly grasping the weight of what she'd done, the depth of the betrayal she'd inflicted on us. I stood up, ready to walk away from this conversation, ready to put it all behind me. As I turned to leave, she called out to me one last time. David, will you ever be able to forgive me? I paused, not looking back. I don't know, Emily. Maybe someday. But not today. And with that, I walked away, leaving her sitting alone, watching as I went. In the days after that last conversation, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to feel relieved. I'd laid it all out, told her exactly how I felt, and watched as she finally understood the damage she'd caused. But it was hard to feel victorious. The reality of what I'd lost hung over me like a weight I couldn't shake. Our home, the routines we'd built, the life we'd made, all of it shattered. The days turned into weeks. Life settled into something like a routine, though it was a far cry from the one I'd had before. My focus stayed on Sophie. I kept things as normal as possible for her, made sure her days were full of the activities and stability she was used to. She knew things were different, of course, but I'd made a promise to myself that I wouldn't let this affect her more than it had to. I'd answer her questions when they came, but for now, I'd just be the steady presence she needed. Emily moved out shortly after our final conversation. She found a small apartment across town, close enough to see Sophie on weekends. It was strange at first, seeing her pick Sophie up, watching them leave together like everything was normal. But I knew this arrangement was better for Sophie. I wanted her to have her mother in her life, even if it hurt to watch them go. Whatever my anger toward Emily, it wasn't Sophie's burden to carry. I thought the worst of it was behind me. But one evening, a few weeks after Emily had moved out, Sophie asked me a question that threw me off guard. Daddy, she said, looking up at me with a serious expression, why doesn't Mommy live here anymore? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Mommy and I, we're not together anymore, sweetheart. But we both love you very much, and that's not going to change. She frowned, processing my words. Is it because of that man? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. What do you mean? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She looked down, fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. I heard Mommy talking to a man on the phone a lot. I thought maybe that's why she left. I closed my eyes for a moment, swallowing the anger that flared up. She must have overheard Emily talking to Jay, the man who had been in the middle of all of this. I wanted to tell her the truth, to say that her mother had left us for someone else. But I knew I couldn't. Sophie was too young to carry that weight. It's complicated, Sophie, I said finally. Sometimes adults make choices that are hard to understand. But it doesn't change how much we love you, okay? She nodded, but I could see the sadness in her eyes. I wanted to fix it, to take away whatever confusion or hurt she felt, but there was no way to make this easy. I reached out, wrapping an arm around her. Just remember, Sophie, I said softly. This isn't your fault. None of this is because of you. She nodded again, leaning into me, and I felt the tightness in my chest ease a little. I knew there would be more questions, more difficult conversations. But for now, I'd done what I could. I'd given her as much honesty as she could handle, and that would have to be enough. The weeks turned into months. I settled into life as a single dad, learning how to balance work and Sophie's needs. It was challenging, but it felt good to be focused on her, to put my energy into building a new life for us. I'd lost a lot, but I'd also gained something: clarity, maybe, or a sense of resilience I hadn't known I had. Emily's betrayal had shaken me to the core, but it hadn't broken me. I started going to the gym more regularly, pushing myself to get back into shape. There was something therapeutic about the physical effort, about setting goals and achieving them, even if they were just small victories. It felt like I was taking control of my life again, rebuilding myself one step at a time. Emily was still part of our lives, of course. She and I kept our interactions limited to co-parenting, discussing Sophie's schedule, her school projects, her doctor's appointments. We were civil, but distant. I didn't ask about her life, and she didn't ask about mine. It was an unspoken agreement, one that we both seemed to respect. One afternoon, I got a call from her. It was unusual. She usually texted or emailed about anything related to Sophie, so an actual call was out of the ordinary. I hesitated before answering, unsure of what she could want. "Hello? David." "Hi," she said, her voice uncertain. "I was hoping we could talk. About us, about everything." I felt a flicker of irritation. I didn't want to rehash this. I'd made my peace with her, or as much peace as I could. But there was something in her voice that made me pause. "All right," I said cautiously. "What do you want to talk about?" There was a long silence before she spoke again. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. I know I've apologized before, but it's different now. I think I'm finally starting to understand what I put you through, what I took away from you and Sophie." Her words didn't stir anything in me. The apology felt like it was coming too late, like an afterthought. But I listened, waiting to see where she was going with this. "I'd been seeing a therapist," she continued. "Trying to figure out why I did what I did. And I know that probably doesn't matter to you, but I wanted you to know. I wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better, for Sophie's sake, and for my own." "Good," I said simply. "I'm glad you're working on yourself." She hesitated, as if expecting more. "I know it won't change anything, but do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me?" I took a deep breath, considering her question. Forgiveness felt like a distant concept, something I wasn't sure I could ever offer her. But as I looked at where I was now, the life I'd built for myself and Sophie, I realized that maybe I didn't need to hold on to the anger anymore. Maybe I didn't need to forgive her for her sake, but for mine. "Maybe one day," I said finally, choosing my words carefully. "But for now, I'm focused on Sophie, on moving forward." "You should do the same." She nodded, though I couldn't see her. "Thank you, David. For listening. And for being a good father to Sophie." That was the end of the conversation. I hung up, feeling a strange sense of closure. I didn't know if I would ever forgive her, but I knew I was ready to let go of the bitterness, the anger. I'd taken back control of my life, and that was enough. The weeks continued to pass, each one a little easier than the last. I found joy in the small moments, watching Sophie's soccer games, cooking dinner together, helping her with homework. Life was quieter, simpler, but it felt good. I was no longer defined by what Emily had done, I was defined by the choices I was making now. One evening, as I was tucking Sophie into bed, she looked up at me with a smile. "I'm glad it's just us, Daddy," she said, her voice sleepy. "Me too, sweetheart," I said, smiling back. As I turned off the light and left her room, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready for whatever came next. The pain of the past was fading, replaced by something stronger, a sense of purpose, a renewed strength. I'd been broken, yes. But I'd rebuilt myself. And now, I was ready to live again, one day at a time.